All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to day 2. How's everybody feeling today? Pretty good. Some of you are not up yet. That's awesome. Hey, who had a great night last night? Who found the patio? Who found the terrace up there? Saw the view? Who crashed the luau? That's what I really want to know. Some of you guys probably did. That was a cool-looking party. We had a lot of fun last night, great desserts. There was lots to do. We're going to have more fun for you guys tonight, but you got to get through the work part first here. There's a new children's museum right across the street from where we're at. It's directly at the end of the driveway across the street. If you don't get hit by the trolley, you guys would make it walking. So make sure you take a look for that. I'll give you the address, but you're not really going to get in a car. It's right across the street. You'll see it. Tonight, that's going to start at 7 p.m. You want to have your badge. You have to be 21 and up to get to that. So we have a lot more fun. You can explore exhibits over at the museum, food. There's going to be music. So make sure you guys are hitting that digital learning annex. I know a lot of you guys are going in and out of there. We'd love to see you there. What happened to all the tweets? We had some tweets going great yesterday, then it kind of slowed down. I have an idea, though. I might want to try to get those going. Who has these bags with them this morning? I need 3 people who have these bags to come up here with me if you're brave. I'm not going to do anything hard to use or anything, but I need 3 volunteers. We got 1, 2, looks like 3. Come on up. How about our brave volunteers, you guys? They don't even know what they're in for. So, we said we wanted your feedback, and a couple ladies approached me yesterday and said they don't know how to wear this thing exactly, and they were wondering what's the best way. I didn't really know the answer, so I thought we would take a vote. If you could put that over your shoulder, over your head, kind of side satchel it, that looks perfect. Now, not you, sir. That's her wear. That's her design. Now, if you take your arm out, bring it to your front, where you can kind of get in and out of the pouch. Front. All right, and if you could put it on over your head. Yep. Yeah, and leave it on the back. So come step forward just a little bit. We've got side satchel, which I like to call, front pouch, or backpack. All right? Hold on. Don't take them off. I'm going to tweet this, if you don't mind. And we're going to take a vote by way of retweets. You guys know how that works. You can see this. I'll hashtag it and everything for you. Let me get by a good picture. I don't want to fall off the stage. So you're going to be voting for side satchel, front pouch, or backpack. And I'll get that out, you guys, while you're listening to your first keynote this morning. Thank you guys very much. You get to keep the bags. So you guys, I still can't wait to share that announcement with you. Tomorrow, we've got that big announcement. I have a hint for you, though, today. It is east of San Diego, okay? So we are going to be moving somewhere else. Next, you guys, I want to invite up first, I guess, two gals. One is the marketing program manager with Cengage Learning. She has been in book publishing her whole entire career and is one of the Cengage team members responsible for producing this conference that you're at. The other one will call her mom soon. So ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Valerie Hartman and Baby Hartman.
First year here for the little one. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce to you Soren Gordhamer, who is our keynote speaker this morning. Soren is the founder and host of the Wisdom 2.0 conference, which takes place in the Bay Area. It's been happening since 2010, and since then has gotten so much media coverage. And what the Wisdom 2.0 conference does is it brings together leaders and staff from the tech world, such as the founders of Facebook, Zynga, Twitter, eBay, and the list goes on, with teachers from wisdom traditions. And they come together and they talk about how to live mindfully and purposefully and wisely in this technology-rich age. So Soren is going to be speaking to us this morning about these topics. So with that, I welcome Soren Gordhamer.
Hi, welcome. So I hope everybody's getting the tea, coffee, food, whatever they need to start the morning. I noticed as I was reading through all the list of courses that are happening here, I was looking at things like Microsoft Office 2013 and the cloud, a crash course on HTML5, boot camp for A+ certification and beyond, mobile websites with Dreamweaver CS6, and then me, conscious connection in the digital age. And it made me think about what an interesting mix those are. So in 1 hour, you can be better understanding how to use Microsoft Office. And the next hour, there's somebody like me coming up and telling you how to be more attentive and careful to your use of Microsoft Office or your use of your cell phone and your computer. So again, my name is Soren, and the two worlds, as Valerie said, that I tend to overlap are these worlds of technology. So I spend a lot of time with the leaders of technology in Silicon Valley, and at the conference I've interviewed, the founders of Twitter, Facebook, eBay, Zynga. Last week I was interviewing Arianna Huffington. So I have spent a lot of time in the tech world, but then I also have this really strong interest in wisdom and mindfulness, and realizing that if we're not careful with our use of technology, all of a sudden we're becoming more overwhelmed, more distracted, more burdened, and the technologies that initially might have appeared as our humble servants have become our overbearing masters. And so what is this middle road where we use and benefit and engage all the great technologies of our age, but we do it in ways that support our well-being and that actually add to our innovation and creativity? And so one of the things that I'll be talking more about this in the presentation, one of the things that I found when I've interviewed so many of the leaders of technology is that while they're very smart intellectually and they know programming and they know all of that aspect, there's this other element, we'll just call it mindfulness or wisdom, that they actually bring into their work that's equally important. And if you think of teaching and you think of what really makes a powerful lesson get across, it's not just having the right information to share, but it's the students actually being in a state of mind to receive that information, right? I mean, I could be the most profound, wise, incredible teacher offering extremely useful information, but if you're in the audience and your mind isn't present and isn't available, it's like the information doesn't have anywhere to sink, doesn't have anywhere to digest. So I would argue that if, as educators, all of us are both looking to provide quality content, but maybe more importantly, we also need to create an atmosphere in the classroom where people can receive and learn and assimilate what we're sharing. And if they're doing 10 other things at the same time, the chances that that information that we're providing is actually going to land is pretty unlikely, or land and actually be digested is pretty unlikely. So there's this balance between quality content and then this other balance between the state of mind and the openness and the receptivity of the people receiving that content. And when those two are together, we generally have the most optimal creative learning environments. And what we find often within the Silicon Valley community is this huge emphasis on innovation. So it's both taking that information, but also really supporting that person into using it in ways that you would never see possible. So one of the stories I like to tell is of Twitter. So before Twitter was created, the guys who started Twitter, Ev and Biz and friends, were working on another startup that was just not getting any traction at all, and it was failing. And instead of continuing it, they said, well, let's just take 2 weeks and do a brainstorm, because clearly what we're doing isn't working. So they took 2 weeks and they did a brainstorm. They told all their staff, let's just brainstorm and see what we come up with. And it was in those 2 weeks that this whole idea for what is now Twitter emerged through just their own creative exploration. And at the time, of course, they had no idea that it was going to lead to the level of interest that it has now. But it became just this innovative idea, which was instead of just sending one text message to somebody else, what if there was a way in which we could share updates with people who were interested in, numerous people who were interested in whatever was going on with us or whatever we were thinking. And there's so many stories like that where the idea actually is not that profound. You know, if you think about it, it's like what, like put a little 140 characters in a little box and have people read it. It's actually pretty simple. But the ability to have that idea and the ability to actually see what the next trend is takes a certain quality of attention and a quality of awareness. And if we're just engulfed in our email or engulfed in news and everything else, our mind doesn't have a lot of space to have those creative ideas, right? Because it's almost like our mind is full. There's an old Zen story I like to tell of a university professor who really wanted to understand Zen. And he had studied it for many years, and he heard about the Zen master, who is very well known. So one day he travels and visits the Zen master. And the Zen master says, "What would you like to learn from me?" And the professor says, "Well, I have all this information. I know all this data and all these facts about Zen. And I figure if you can actually help me with your knowledge and your information, then I can know everything there is to know about Zen." And so, and he started talking and telling the Zen master all the knowledge he had. And the Zen master responded by saying, "Would you like some tea?" And the professor said yes. And the Zen master started pouring the tea into the cup. And at some point, the cup becomes full, and the tea starts overflowing onto the table and filling the room. And the professor at one point says, "Stop! Can't you see the cup is full? It won't take any more." To which the Zen master said, "Just like this cup, your mind is full. How can I teach you first about Zen if you don't empty your mind, empty your cup?" And it's often this element of emptying that I think we find so challenging in our world today. I'm curious, who here has what we call a smartphone? Who pretty much takes their smartphone wherever they go? And who remembers the moment that they got their smartphone? I do. And I remember when I got my smartphone, I was amazed, like, shit, I can actually check my email at any time, right? I'm sitting at a red light. I don't have to sit at a red light. I can check my email. I'm waiting in line. Hell, I can check my email right now. I'm walking down the street. My God, I could use this to check my email. And then while I'm hoping that all the emails I get are like love letters and notes from friends just saying they love me and you know, whatever cute quotes, often what comes through that stream, I don't have a lot of control over. And often it's work related, somebody needs a decision about something, somebody's upset about something. So we now have access to this stream of information like we've never done before, right? It's like, and we're tempted to access that at all times of the day and to fill our minds with various content. And so it seems that this next trend, and it's beautiful and I do it and I love it and I'm on Twitter and Facebook and I have tons of email. And at the same time, though, what we're seeing is there's this new chapter that we're emerging in our culture, which is now that we have access to all this information, how do we actually manage it? Now that I can check my email 24 hours a day, how do I not? And how do I actually have some time where I can tune into my own body, my own mind, and I can get nourished by life rather than feel like these demands are being continuously put on me? So what we're beginning to see in this culture, and I think it's showing up in education life, family life, it's definitely showing up in the technology industry, is this quality of attention and the importance of attention. Somebody said the greatest gift you can give someone is your attention, your presence. And if you think of all of us, think of the great teachers that we've had and the great educators who've been in our life, I would argue that most of them were extremely smart, but more importantly, they touched us through their presence. That when we were with them, we felt seen, we felt heard, we felt met. And the information they had to get across was important, but there was some other quality about them that really touched us. And they could see us. And this is why this whole conversation about should we have robots, you know, teaching in the classroom, I think is a bit silly. Because in some ways, there's this quality of presence that technology can't really provide, and that us as educators, we can provide. And when we're in there and we're talking to our students or we're showing our students whatever it is that we're teaching them, the information's important, but what is the state of our mind? What is the quality of our presence? What are we actually getting across to that student? And that when we don't have this, the connection, we call this conscious connection, the digital age, there's actually no real connection. So now there's this common habit, particularly of teenagers, I know this is true in Silicon Valley, and I guess it's true every other places, where there'll be 5 of them sitting at a cafe, and they'll all have their phones, and they'll all be texting friends and each other. So in some ways they're present, but in other ways they're not present at all. You know, they're not actually seeing the other person, they're not making contact with the other person, they're not feeling that other person. And there's this way in which sometimes technology can allow us to hide and to not really engage fully. And I would suggest that so many of you came into education not for the money, I would say, not for the fame. You know, it's not like there's an NBA draft pick each year and you get the top educator chosen. So it's not for the money, it's not for the fame. And most of the people that I know, when they talk about education, they went in because they felt like having an impact, a positive impact. And usually there was someone in their lives that had that impact on them. It might have been the 3rd grade teacher, it might have been the 7th grade teacher, it might have been a high school teacher, it might have been a college teacher, but there was somebody that they felt impacted by, inspired by, touched by, motivated by, and that they want to now offer that to some other young person in the world and to pass that on. So I don't know if that's true for all of you, but it's true for a lot of people I know who go into the education field, is that there's this desire to have an impact. And there's this desire to make a difference. And so then the question is, how do we actually really do that? How do we make a difference? And to me, the balance is twofold. One is it's learning about all the different elements that we can in terms of the latest technology, the latest Microsoft Office, the latest Dreamweaver, whatever it is that can impart knowledge. But there's this other element that's really needed, and that's our presence. And I'm sure most of you have known where you've gone into a class and you're really irritated and upset and having a hard time. The nature of that class often is quite different than if you walk into that class and you're actually meeting the people and present and open and you feel your heart open. That the difference in those classes are pretty distinct. And what businesses are now finding in Silicon Valley is if they all enter into a meeting or they all enter into their day of work and they're not present with each other, they're not mindful, they're not going to get those creative ideas. They're not going to be the next innovative company. They're going to be stagnant, and some other group or some other company is going to beat them, move forward. That's why Bezos, as the CEO of Amazon, supposedly takes 3 days off every quarter and just tunes out and lets his mind begin to envision what's next. Because if it's just doing this kind of continual work mode, there isn't the space to have those creative ideas. Supposedly, Larry Page got the idea for the Google search engine in a dream one night. It just all came more intuitively, right? I mean, he definitely needed a huge amount of knowledge to put that thing together. But there was this other intuitive element. And so what I'm here to do today is to really engage you around this whole subject of how do we balance within a digital age, how do we live mindfully and wisely and effectively? And I have a presentation that I want to show you. There'll be some times for Q&A. And I also want to be able to offer whatever I'm learning from being engaged within the Silicon Valley community that might have resonance for you. Not that they're the best community or the most profound community, but they're an interesting community. And they're a community that's doing making a lot of shit happen in the world. But they're a community that's doing a lot of things and are often on the cutting edge of where this culture is going. So I'll be showing some slides, and again, we'll open it up for questions later on. But thank you, and also thank you for the work that you do, because I know that I go to different places, different conventions, different conferences, and there's something about being in a room of people who are mainly directed through some real desire in their heart to make a difference, versus going into, let's say, a conference where it's a bunch of venture capitalists who are mainly talking about how to increase the value of their companies and get more back. And I just want to say it's always nice for me to come into a group where I feel like I feel pretty aligned, and I also feel like it's a group that it's doing work in the world that's often not given the credit that they're due, and that's really the fabric of how knowledge and wisdom and information gets passed from one culture to another, right? It's through our teachers. And so how do we best make this transfer of knowledge useful not only to students, but particularly for ourselves? So the talk that I'll be moving into, I hope, is just as relevant for you personally as it is for your work. Because I feel like it's the same with any kind of caregiver or any kind of instructor. It's too easy to always focus on the students and always focus on who we're serving, and we don't always give as much attention to ourselves. So with that, this is just to give us a sign of just how much data is now happening in the world. So when I grew up, I'm 44, when I grew up there was pretty much 4 major news stations. And at 11 o'clock at night, I had no choices of what to watch. You know, there would be the, forget what the cloud, different cloud, would all come on, and there would be no more information. And if there was nothing on the 4 stations that I was interested in, I went outside and I played or I did something else. And I remember my father coming home. He worked as a university professor in Lubbock, Texas, where I lived. And I don't remember him ever getting a work call growing up. I mean, he must have at some point. But I don't remember him. I remember him coming home and him basically being with us. And we would all watch TV together, of course. But there was a certain pace of life that I remember as a kid where my dad was pretty much there. My mom, too. She didn't work, so she was home with us. And now it's not that it's a bad world by any means. It's just a different world. Now the content that we have access to is expanding at a skyrocketing pace. But I would question whether our capacity to manage and to handle all that information is increasing with the amount of information. At the same time, more and more of us are wanting to be engaged. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're wanting to share about our lives. So unlike in the past when everything happened through the news, we got our news through the media networks, now we can get our news not only through the media networks, but from thousands of blogs and tons of friends. So the content that have access to and your students have access to is vast, and it's only going to increase. I don't think people are going to stop tweeting or stop Facebook updating or stop blogging. But it just means that there's new challenges that we face and our students face as they have more access to more information. And a lot of this is awesome, right? A lot of this is hugely valuable. And at the same time, it's unlimited. So unlike me when I was growing up and at 11 o'clock, there was pretty much no, as far as I remember, there was no content available to me. Now, any time of day, there's new content everywhere. And if you're on Twitter or on Facebook, you just click refresh, and usually you can find new content. And it's a world that none of us really imagined, I think, of even 5-10 years ago. Like, I think we were just all like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could have our phones do all these amazing things? And now it's a little bit like, oh my God, our phones do all these amazing things. Where do we go from here? And so they're just continuing to impact our lives in many different ways. If you can't see this says mustache, I want to spend some time on my social networking websites. So increasingly in human interaction, we see the digital starting to intercede, right? And you probably see this in students a lot, where they say, you know, excuse me, I need to take this text, or I need to take this call. And it's happening in business, it's happening in our lives. However, there's some challenges that come with it. So this constantly on culture shows that there's a certain level of downtime that we all need in order to function. And if we're on and on and on and on constantly, it's very difficult to go to sleep after 10 to 12 hours of constantly absorbing new information. And so what we're seeing is one of the negative impacts is that more and more people are having a difficult time sleeping. And I would argue that there's often not that downtime that we need between waking life and sleep life. So one of the things, if you're having a hard time sleeping, you can do is to spend that last hour before you go to bed without technology, and actually allow your body to slowly adjust to sleep or to non-doing. And then if we act and act and act and absorb and download and download and download, just like that Zen master story, our cup becomes full. And then we try to go to bed and our mind is just racing and racing and racing. And even though our mind is saying, body, go to bed, I need to go to sleep, right? It's trying to command it to go to sleep. The momentum from the day is just continuing to run us. And so one of the very useful things I really recommend to people is, if you have those challenges, is what would it be like if you spend the last hour before you go to bed, light some candles, turn off lights that are very bright, and just give yourself some downtime. And what I find, and my guess is what you'll find, is your mind is much sharper the next day. And that when we get too overloaded with information, we actually aren't able to process it in a useful way. So McKinsey is even beginning to sense this, where they're saying always-on multitasking work environments are killing productivity, dampening creativity, and making us unhappy. And so if you go into, whether it's schools or businesses, there's this sense that the more I do and the faster I do it, the better the results will be. And I would like to argue that it's not about doing as many things as possible at any one given time, but it's actually about doing fewer things, but with greater attention. And that's where the innovation happens, and that's where the connection happens. And just as a good friend, if you really need their attention, they put aside their magazine, they put aside their phone, and they're just very present for you. In the same way, what we're seeing is this culture can be going so fast that none of us are very present for each other. And what that does is creates a bit of a traffic jam in our mind, a mind traffic jam. And everything is just moving so fast, we can't see clearly. We can't taste our food, we can't listen to our friend, we can't get that creative idea, we can't remember that thought we had the other day that we wanted to bring forth in our lives. So there's this way in which this mental traffic can be moving so fast that we're seeing that it's dampening creativity, productivity, and making us unhappy. This is just one of the funny cartoons from out in the world. If you can't see it, it says, I have 173,682 unread emails. You tell me what I have to live for. So the sense of what was a gift at one point feels more like a burden at times. And the fact that we have all these friends and have all these emails and have all this information, access to this information in many ways is both a blessing and a curse. And so the challenge then is, how do we take the blessing and minimize the curse aspects of it? It's also starting to impact relationships. This is a pretty mind-blowing study if you ask me. If you can't see it, 35% of business travelers said they would choose their PDAs or BlackBerries over their spouses if having to choose. So one of the things we can look at is where and how do we place our attention? So in these situations, often where we put our attention is often an expression of what is most important to us. So if I'm talking to you and we're having a conversation, all of a sudden my cell phone rings, and I say, excuse me, I've got to take this call. What I'm saying in that moment is that cell phone call is more important than our conversation, right? Because where we put our attention determines what we're expressing value to. And so what often happens in our day and age today is that when technology comes in, we habitually, without any thought, answer it. Why? Well, because it's technology. Versus really being mindful and attentive and saying, all right, where is my attention really needed in this moment? Is it talking to my daughter or my son or my colleague, or is it somewhere else? And I never know, of course, where your attention is most needed. Definitely sometimes it's on the phone call, or it's on the tweet, or it's on the text, or it's on the message. But there's this way in which we can either habitually do that, or we can consciously do that. And my argument would be, as educators, the power of teaching somebody how to manage their attention is probably one of the biggest and most powerful tools you can offer. Because if we don't know how to manage our attention, then all of a sudden we find ourselves in situations where we're letting life dictate what really matters to us. And the people who, I have some quotes up later that will show you that whether it's in basketball or in innovation or in technology, that there's this quality of attention that really matters. And so what people are finding in relationships is that the partner's phone, they have a more intimate connection with their phone than they do their spouse. And that's okay if that's what you want. But if it's not what you want, you might want to really explore with your spouse, like, how do I actually align my attention with what I know really matters to me? And I find that I have a 10-year-old son, and I find myself with him sometimes, and I'll be on my phone checking things that I don't really need to check. And what I'm telling him in that moment is, you know what, what's happening on my phone is actually more important than what's happening between us. And he feels that. Even if I don't say it, he still feels it, because he feels it because that's where I'm putting my attention. And wherever I'm putting my attention is expressing what I value. And so, again, it's not good or bad, but the question is it aligned, or are we just habitually going through these motions where we're continually telling the colleagues and the coworkers and the people around us that our attention is more important somewhere else than with them? And that may be true or it may not be true. But I think it's a big challenge in just being honest with ourselves and asking to what extent where we place our attention does it really matter. It's as I mentioned earlier, the way in which technology is impacting our lives is impacting how we hang out together. And people don't actually say this, but if you look at lives, this is pretty much often how it happens. And it's actually not just with young people. People think, oh, it's just teens. It's really all of us. And again, I don't want to put this down. It's just good to make it conscious. Like, hey, are we coming over to hang out with each other, or are we coming over to look at our screens together? So we know actually what really matters. And my argument, I put on conferences, as Valerie mentioned, called Wisdom 2.0. And each year it's grown from 300 4 years ago to 1,700 this year. And people ask me, it's like, what's the interest? Why do people keep coming? And more people. And you know what I say is, I think that in this age of digital life, where we're all looking at our phones and we're spending so much of our evenings on Facebook and on the digital realm, we long for a human-to-human contact. You know, we're longing for this way in which we feel like we're met by somebody. Our eyes are there, we see their facial expressions, we get a sense of who they are. That's very different than just submitting a text to them. And my guess is a lot of you came here, not both for the information, but also for the human connections that are possible and the collaborations and the sense of community that can develop when you're in person. And that doesn't say anything wrong about the digital, but that along with the digital, we need this human-to-human contact. And so my sense is that the more this happens, where we all get together to look at our phones, that there's this other rise, there's this other inkling or rise in us to actually have these connections that are the human-to-human. And how to do that within the education world, I think, is probably one of the most important elements. Because you're meeting the people who are going to be really choosing where our society goes. And to be able to offer the importance of the human connection along with the technological, to me that's really where our culture needs to go, and it's pretty much the next chapter that we're moving to. Again, this is says pay attention while walking. Your Facebook status updates can wait. I would like to say that I've never done this, but I was walking in New York City once, and I remember being my phone, I can't remember, I must have been having to text somebody about, there was something really, really important, I'm sure. But just like almost walking into a lamppost as I was doing this, and I was like, shit, I'm supposed to be like Mr. Mindfulness with all this stuff? But increasingly, it's a challenge, right? We're sitting there, we're at the red light, and we know that there's this gadget that could entertain us. And that's really the challenge, isn't it? Is that there's always something to entertain us. Or there's always something to provide content to us. And how do we live with that? How do we live in a way that is balanced and useful? So not only that, but vacations. For those of you who can't see that, I'll read it. It says, enjoy your vacation, Steve. See you next week. He says, thanks, Jen. Say, if anyone needs me, they can just hit me on my cell or PM me on Facebook, or what the hell, just write on my wall since I'll be checking it. Or you can DM me, direct message me on Twitter or IM or me on AIM. At nights I'll be on Xbox, so you can message me there too. Short of that, I want to be left the hell alone and get some much needed rest. So how many of us have actually gone on vacation to get much needed rest, and we find ourselves still in the same loop of communication that we went on the vacation to get away from? So essentially, where we put our physical bodies, as long as we have a laptop or a phone, it doesn't actually give us any rest, because we're always connected. And again, it's not good or bad, it's just different. You know, when I was raised as a kid, we would go on vacation, we didn't have cell phones. So we were away, and someone would have to call the hotel or call the campsite or call something, you know, to access it. Because we were essentially given this sacred space. And same with dinners. You know, it used to be that dinners, you would not answer the phone, you would turn the phone off, and there's only one phone in the house. Now there's like 3 teenagers and 5 phones and information coming in multiple ways. And so because this time isn't really built into our culture anymore, in order for us to get it, we really have to work for it. And we really have to make it a priority. This says, if you can't see it, it says, you'd know that about me if you followed me on Twitter. You see seemingly a father and a child out in the woods, and it says, you'll never have a greater sense of awe at the enormity of the unknown, the vastness of the universe, infinite possibilities, than on the eve of a new iPhone release. And the things that we look to in our culture now are often based on, technology in some respect. So now I want to move into the power of attention. So here's this world. It's not a good or bad world. It's just the nature of our world. More data, more connection, more technology, and more ways to access that. Right now it's our phones. Who knows, 5 years from now we could all be wearing headsets that give us information. And yet what we're finding is that alone, technology alone, doesn't really satisfy us. It doesn't really meet our deepest needs. And that there's this other element of our attention and the quality of our attention that really matters the most. And that attention could be put on technology or it could be put on something else. But it's this quality of attention that really matters. So this is from some Harvard researchers, a study of 2,200 people. What they found was people tended to be happier if they focused on the activity instead of thinking about something else. And they concluded location of the body is much less important than the location of the mind, and that the former has surprisingly little influence on the latter. So what they did is they asked people the level of happiness they had at different times during the day. And you would think that being on a beach in the Bahamas would be much better than being in a cab in traffic in New York City. But what they discovered, and what other researchers are increasingly discovering, is that it's actually our inner world and the quality of attention, the quality of presence that we have that determines our happiness, not necessarily the external environment where we're in, which is pretty profound. I think the external environment can definitely help. And I love to go to the beach if I can make it to the beach. But at the same time, we can go to the beach, and what are we doing at the beach? We're worrying about our stocks, or we're worrying about something we said, or worrying about some conflict we had at work. And the beach is great, but actually we're not making contact with the beach. We're making contact with our thoughts and our worries and our fears and everything else going on. And so what they're realizing is that when the mind is present, when we're actually showing up, that there's a level of satisfaction and happiness in that's somewhat independent of the nature of the conditions around us. This is from Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin. It says, people are very involved in the physical fitness craze, working out several times a week, but we don't pay that kind of attention to our minds. Modern neuroscience is showing that our minds are as plastic as our bodies. David Mayer at University of Michigan. When people try to perform two or more related tasks, either at the same time or alternating rapidly between them, errors go way up and it takes longer, often double the time or more, to get the jobs done than if they were done sequentially. So I would argue that doing them sequentially means doing them mindfully and actually putting our full attention to whatever it is we're doing in that moment, versus trying to do 5 different things and having our mind toggle back and forth between those 5 different things. The work that it takes the brain to be able to manage that kind of multitasking, maybe when we're like 20, there's some studies that suggest when we're younger we have a greater capacity for that, and as we get older we have less capacity. But what some of the other studies are suggesting is that none of us can actually do that, and we're fooling ourselves. And when we can give our presence to one task and then the next task sequentially, we not only get more done, but we make fewer mistakes, and it's not that experience of energy drain at the end of the day. This is from Steve Jobs, where he says, I began to realize that an intuitive understanding and consciousness was more significant than abstract thinking and logical analysis. And if you read the book about him, he talks about his work with better understanding the mind. And it was into Zen meditation and different things. And he said when he could still his mind, when he could still it and quiet it, he could actually hear that voice of innovation and that creative idea. But it required him stilling his mind in order to be able to access it. And I feel like that's one of the pieces that more and more young people need to be trained in, is that they need to be trained not only in how to have abstract thinking, as Steve Jobs mentioned, but also how to have intuitive thinking, which again takes a certain quality of attention or mindfulness. This is from Phil Jackson, who won 9 NBA titles as a coach and is the NBA's career leader in playoff victories and playoff winning percentage. He says, when players practice what is known as mindfulness, paying attention to what's actually happening, not only do they play better and win more, they also become more attuned to each other. So what we find that's true, definitely in the tech world, we also find was true in sports. So there was a person named George Mumford, who is a friend of mine who for years worked with Phil Jackson. So he worked when Phil Jackson was at the Bulls, Chicago Bulls, and then also when he was at the Lakers. And George is a sports psychologist. And so before the games, they would work with players, helping them focus their attention. So they would do mindfulness exercises for like 10 minutes before the games. And so Coach Jackson would argue, listen, I can get a great physical athlete, they're a dime a dozen, but it's very hard to get a great physical and a great mental athlete. And what really matters when the game happens is not just how high somebody can jump or how far somebody can shoot, but it's the quality of attention with which they're engaged in the game. And so when one of their players gets fouled, do they react in anger and frustration, irritation, and then pretty much the next 10 to 15 minutes they're out of the zone, so to speak? Or can they be mindful and aware and really stay attuned to each other? And what he found was that the quality of attention that the players had before the game would greatly determine the results. So he'd have his players do yoga and different breathing exercises and other things like that to become more attuned. And so if you read his book, Sacred Hoops, it's from some time ago, but he talks more about how he brought in these elements of mindfulness into his coaching. This is from Evan Williams, who I was interviewing 2 weeks ago at our conference. He says, doing anything well requires paying attention to what you're doing. So he left Twitter, and with his new company, Obvious, they're doing all kinds of things. So one of the things they're doing is actually mindfulness programs at the company twice a week. So you can take an hour off of your normal work mode, and you can then go into a room with an instructor, and they just practice centering and focusing and better understanding the mental aspect of life. And we see that in more and more companies, that they're realizing that while people are working constantly and working more, that they need to actually have these breaks during the day. And just like that Zen story, they need to be able to empty their cup, or else just pouring more information into their minds isn't actually that helpful. This is from Dustin, who I also interviewed, last year, who was one of the founders of Facebook and is now with a new company called Asana. He says companies who are not mindful lose their way, lose their best people, become complacent, and stop innovating. And so again, there's this element on how do we actually become mindful and attentive and aware. And when we get caught in modes that don't support that, our companies don't flourish. This is from Publisher Warrior, who's the CTO of Cisco, who's also is a friend. And she talks about this quality of attention, not only in the sense of innovation, but in the sense of listening. She says, the one thing that I've learned in over 2 decades of experience in the tech industry is never assume you know the answer. I find that the more I listen, the quicker I learn. And that's the other thing I think of as educators, is to what extent are we teaching our students to listen and to pay attention? Tony Hsieh, who is the CEO of Zappos, which was, I think probably most people know Zappos. If you're a woman who's bought a shoe in the past few years, probably know Zappos. He says, the biggest and hardest lesson I've learned in life is that the external world is just a reflection of the world within. Which to me is an extremely profound statement if you think about it. The external world is simply a reflection of the world within. That means if we go into a class and our world within is chaotic, what's most likely to happen in that class? What's likely to happen in that class is a certain amount of chaos and friction and discord and disharmony because of what we're experiencing. And when we walk into a class and we're present, we're open, and we're actually making contact with our students, and we're seeing them, and we're showing up, what's most likely to happen in that class? What's most likely to happen in that class is the students are going to respond accordingly. So Tony's also spoken at our conferences, and when he created Zappos, he had sold his previous company to Microsoft for tons of money, so he didn't have to work anymore. And so he decided if he's going to start another company again, the company has to be more enjoyable than his own life at home by himself. So he says, I'm only going to start a company if I make it fun and really enjoyable. So he created Zappos with this whole element that people need to feel engaged and enjoy their job. So they have things at Zappos like Weird Hat Day, and everybody comes wearing a weird hat day, or Strange Food Day, and everybody comes bringing strange food. He tried to create an atmosphere where he says if people are really enjoying their work and connected to one another, then that's going to create a positive impact on the company. This is from Biz Stone, who I also interviewed at our business conference last year, who's one of the founders of Twitter. Biz is like he's like the creative guy behind Twitter. So if you think of a team, often the teams have like a marketing person, they've got programmers, but for many of the most innovative teams, they also have like a creative designer who doesn't really know much coding, but who's there just to think creatively and come up with wild, bizarre ideas. That tends to be Biz. And in a blog post, this isn't from the interview he did, but it's from a blog post, and I think it really speaks well to what we're seeing in Silicon Valley as the next trend. He says, whatever role is at the company you work for, whether you're an executive with many reports or an individual contributor on a team, practicing regular daily mindfulness and compassion will make you a healthier, more productive person. Additionally, the people you work with are going to respond better and do better. The outcome is going to be a superior product or service, a happier user or client, and in the best case, a positive global impact. So I just want us to take that in for a second. I mean, Biz could be off, he could be right on, I don't really know. But what we're seeing is some of the most creative, successful innovators in Silicon Valley saying very much a similar thing, which is if you're practicing mindfulness and compassion, if you're practicing actually being aware of what you're experiencing and how you're showing up, and you're practicing engaging and having empathy and connection with those you work with, that is actually the best. What does he say? He says that practicing will make you a happier and healthier, more productive person, that's actually the best you can do within your company. And this continues to be, if there's anything I can offer you that's like what's happening in Silicon Valley or what's happening within the tech world, and what are some of the skills that the next generation need in order to do well within business, at least from the conversations that I'm having, I think Biz expresses it pretty well here, where he's saying the mindfulness practice, the engagement, that's actually going to allow you to create a superior product or service, have a happier user or client, and a positive global impact. And this is from Jeff Weiner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn, who I also got to interview a few weeks ago. He says pretty much what Biz says. He says, of all the management principles I've adopted over the years, either through direct experience or learning from others, there's one that I aspire to live by more than any other. That principle is managing compassionately. So Jeff would say actually his entire work at LinkedIn is simply to promote wisdom and compassion. It's pretty profound as a CEO of one of the hottest, fastest growing technology companies in the country. And he's saying actually the service that we provide is all infused by our culture, and our culture, when we're connected to one another, when we're engaged with one another, when we have compassion for one another, that creates the optimum work environment that lets us create and actually do better for the company. It's not just a side. So I asked him about this, and it's like, Jeff, how can you warrant focusing on compassion when you're running a public company that's supposed to make a profit, right? Like, what does compassion have to do with making a profit? And he basically said, well, I would argue that compassion has a great deal to do with making a profit, and that the more the people in our company feel connected and feel like they're empathetic towards one another and feel like they're mindful and they're listening to one another, that creates the environment for us to produce the great next products that will make our company succeed. So again and again, what I hear is that there's this quality of attention that's needed both in our own mind and body, but then also in connection with others. And that this creates, whether it's a classroom or a business, it doesn't really matter. It's all just a group of people connecting with one another, in communication with one another, And the power of our direct human contact is what people are finding anyways, is when that is then connected with the technology, that's when we have the greatest results. So LinkedIn, of course, it's a tech company. They're producing all kinds of cool features to their website, but Jeff also realizes that the greatest feature in many ways is how they relate to each other at the company. And if they're in discord and disharmony and power struggles and not compassionate, that's not going to produce the right environment. So here's some things I'd like to pass on that are just encouragements. I don't think there's any shoulds in this, or thou shalt be mindful, or bad things are going to happen to you. But these are just some pieces that I aspire to do. One is to take time to disconnect. And if you're at time during the day, what's that time at night where we're just going to say, okay, you know what, I've downloaded enough information today. Is it 8, 9, 10? I'm not sure what that time is. But I would encourage just having some time to disconnect, where we say, no more work email, no more other email. I'm just going to let my mind empty, let the cup empty. And that also can happen during the day, too, where you take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just to take a breath, go for a walk, listen to some music, do something that refreshes and enlivens us. The second, to the extent you can, is to remember the breath. So there's one thing that's always happening in the present moment, and that's our breathing. And so we're standing in line waiting for food, we're standing in line somewhere else waiting for something to happen. It can be very useful, and studies have shown, when you take a couple of mindful, aware breaths, you can do it right now, actually. It tends to have a very soothing impact on the body. And you don't have to tell everybody. You don't have to stand up at the meeting and say, I'm consciously being aware of my breath now, everybody. Nobody needs to know. It doesn't need to be announced on Facebook or Twitter. It's just something you can do silently to yourself. And there's something about it that's like drinking cold water on a hot summer day. To me, there's a refreshing element that happens. The other is to move. And you can read all the research on your own, but they found that if you really want your brain to function well and your creativity to function well, some exercise during the day is useful. And if we're sitting in a chair in front of a screen for longer and longer hours, the body just doesn't function very well. The fourth, which I really encourage and has been harder to do, is looking at how we spend our lunches. And the tendency more and more these days is to spend our lunches eating in front of screens or doing a lot of communication while we eat. And so we don't really taste the food that we're eating, and it doesn't absorb, we don't digest it very well. And it continues to feel like, instead of lunch feeling like a break, often lunch feels like it's just work with food. So I'd encourage you, if you can, even if it's just once a week, to take your food and to find a quiet place that's relaxing. It helps to be in nature if you can, or to even put a plant up or some nature connection at your work. But to see if you can make those breaks at the meal time relaxing and rejuvenating, and to put away the phone, to put away the computer, and to actually take in the food as much as you can. The other, which I had mentioned earlier, is to do one thing at a time. Again, the tendency is to juggle 4 or 5 things and think we make a little progress here, a little progress there, a little progress there. And there's something else about really staying focused on one task and completing that task. The other is to focus on transitions. And what I mean by this is in our lives, we often have various things in our schedule during the day. So we have a meeting, a phone call, a class. And it's easy to get in a very hyperactive mode and then to transition from one activity to another with a certain stressed out feel. So if you see people in the tech industry and walking in the halls of like Facebook or Twitter, it doesn't happen all the time, but the tendency is to be walking so fast, you realize there's nobody home, really. Or there's very little attention home because they're rushing from one meeting to the next. And of course, then when we do that and we show up at that meeting, our mind isn't actually very present, because how we got there was mainly through rush and through hurry and through stress. So if you notice yourself having a really stressful day, one of the things I would encourage is to say, all right, how do I make these transitions between meetings and between activities more mindful? And so they're exploring this within the tech world too, is how do we provide support and help for people so that life and work isn't just this one treadmill of running faster and faster, but that in these transitions we can slow down and take some time. And the other is to use technology as a reminder. I mean, we have these phones. I don't have mine now. I'm a little nervous, actually. It's somewhere in the back. I'm usually not. I usually have it on me all the time. But what some people do is they can set reminders on their phones for them to support some of these actions. So that a reminder can ring every day at 10:15 for you to take a break, right? And so the reminder rings, and then you know that's your time to go for a walk or to step away from the computer. So the technology then becomes, instead of a distraction, actually becomes a reminder. And there's lots of apps now. I was interviewing Ariana Huffington last week at our conference, or a few weeks ago at our conference. She was talking about her new app called GPS for the Soul, which you can check out. And there's other apps too that are attempting to use technology to help us become more mindful and more attuned. But even if you don't do that, you can use your reminder or your alarm clock on your phone to set things for yourself each day. You can even set one, for example, to ring at 9 o'clock each night. And you know that when that rings at 9 o'clock, day is over, and now it's time to read, take a bath, go for a walk, to do something else. So the phone and our technology actually then becomes a support system for us that helps us live the life that we want to live. And so that's the show. We wanted to leave a little bit of time. We have about 8 minutes left for questions. So if you have questions, there's a few places you can stand up and you can ask. And if there are not any questions, I'll finish up. But if you have questions, and just so you know that they did some research a while back ago, and speaking in public was the #1 fear that most people had. I think death was number 3. So we'd rather be humiliated, we fear being humiliated rather than we fear dying. So if you tend to be shy and you're just not wanting to get up and potentially say something that isn't profound, that's totally fine too. But if you are wanting if you have a question that's burning in your mind, please come up and ask. Yeah, there's somebody here.
Can you hear me? I'm not shy.
Okay.
Good morning. I've been starting practicing something which I kind of call it zero state of mind with my students. When I'm walking, the first 5 minutes, just do something totally unrelated to the subject. Showing them a video of Pavarotti and James Brown, or the latest thing on YouTube, or whatever, something funny, something unrelated. And just to start their mind off fresh, like that empty cup. Any comments on that before we start an hour-long class that they might not be interested in, or it's complicated, or whatever the subject is?
Great. Yeah, so I think all that stuff is wonderful, and I think anything that, you can walk into a room sometimes and you feel either like a sense of deadness or a sense of life, and I think sometimes in the classroom you walk in and just, it feels like there's just, the life isn't there. So anything that then uplifts that group, whether it's through a short video or even funny, like YouTube video that can be shown, that all of a sudden people are engaged and smiling and they feel themselves alive. To me, anything that does that is super helpful. And if the other element too is, along with kind of charging it with some energy, the other thing is, how do we get people to be more aware of whatever they're experiencing in the moment? So if you see some of these quotes about being mindful that we've talked about, to me, mindfulness isn't just about having a positive attitude. So some people think, well, I'm having a really difficult day. I need to be mindful to have a better day. And to me, what mindfulness is actually becoming aware and attentive to whatever our direct experience is, and that whenever we're aware of that, it changes the quality of our experience. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure we've had those times where, I've had a lot of these times where I'm just frustrated throughout the day, and I'm not even aware of it. I'm just talking to people in a way that doesn't feel good, but I can't label what's actually happening. And finally, a friend will sit me down and will be like, you know what, Soren? How you're relating to people is not cool. And it seems like you're really angry. Are you angry? I'm like, yeah, actually I'm angry. Like, well, what's going on? I'm like, all right, I'm angry about this. And it helps me get clear on what's actually happening. And I think for so many people today, the tendency is to always have our awareness externally and to always have our awareness somewhere else besides our own mind and body. And I think it's a real art to then offer teachings in classrooms and entertain people and engage people, but at the same time help them become more aware of whatever they're experiencing in the moment. And often we're only aware of this at night when we go to sleep. You know, we're lying in our bed, and all of a sudden we notice all the thoughts that are going through and all the body sensations, and it can be a little overwhelming. So I think to the extent that we can do that ourselves, the extent that we can offer that to the students, I feel like that's actually the jewel and the missing element, is this awareness. And it sounds so simple and so easy, and it is and it isn't, right? Because it's like easy to do, but it's hard to remember to do. And so I think both of those are really helpful, things that are entertaining and make people laugh and smile and like charge the room. And then also things that help people become more aware of themselves.
Thank you.
So before I did this work that I'm doing now, I used to teach in New York City juvenile halls. So for 7 years, I taught mindfulness programs that had some yoga and meditation, different things to incarcerated kids in Brooklyn, Harlem, the Bronx. And so I would come in as a skinny white dude working with them who are mainly from just different cultures and different backgrounds. And I remember I have to find a way to engage them. And I'd have about 5 minutes before their attention would just be off on something else. And of course, they would have all these ideas of who I am and what I'm there for. And I found a couple things were useful. One is I found myself using humor a lot. So I'd be like, all right, dudes, we're going to do this meditation, but this is really dangerous, so you better listen up. And all of a sudden, if they hear the word dangerous, you know, they pick up. I'm just like, all right, we're going to do this meditation. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. But what happens sometimes during the meditation is that people start to levitate up. And you can hit your head on the ceiling if you're not careful, right? So I need everybody to listen up. So I want you to grab a hold of your chair really strongly, okay, while you do this, right? And that way, if you start to levitate off the ground, your chair will keep you on the ground, right? And I'm talking about it's totally straight base. And inevitably one kid will be like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, like, they'll get it, right? And they'll be like, yeah, man, guys, I was just joking with you. And then all of a sudden we could actually do the practice, and they were in a much more like open state of mind to do it. And I think inevitably, I don't know your communities. I mean, you know your crowd much better than I do, so I could never say do X, Y, or Z. But I think when we're attentive and we're mindful, we can come up with creative ways to engage people that are unique for our situation. And so the years I spent working with incarcerated kids, it's hugely valuable because they didn't care about my background, they didn't care about my degrees, they didn't care about, you know, they just cared about could I feel you, could I sense you, could I empathize with you. And my sense is that's the quality that so many of us are looking for. Is we're just looking to be understood. We're looking for somebody to actually see us and to feel us and to understand us and to connect with us. And I think while we can do that with technology, we can also really do that through our human-to-human contact. So maybe one quick question if there's one more, and then, yeah.
So in our world of so much online, I really agree with what you're saying about looking them directly in the eye. I want to speak to you, put my hand on your shoulder.
Yeah.
But we've got all this online learning that we're doing, and how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's great. So she said, with all this online learning that's going on, how do we help support the human-to-human connections? Which, if you're all in the classroom together, you can look someone into the eye to eye, you can put your hand on their back, you can have that contact. And I think it's a challenge. At the same time, those people live in communities somewhere, right? So if that person taking that online class is living in San Diego, and most likely they live with a partner or a friend, or they have kids, or they have colleagues, there's some other people in their life. And I think it can be a real interesting lesson to use the online element, but to come up with exercises and even suggestions that support more human-to-human interaction. So for example, I don't know what subjects you teach, but interview somebody this week on this subject, or find somebody in your neighborhood who knows about X, Y, Z and interview them. I think interviewing is a huge skill because it forces us to listen. And it forces us not to have this back and forth, and it actually forces us to really receive somebody. So I think any exercise, if we can somehow work it into the curriculum that involves a human-to-human interaction and really listening, Now, how to do that when you're teaching, you know, Dreamweaver, the latest version of Dreamweaver, I don't know. But I think we can come up with some creative ways to integrate that into our online learning so that the people hopefully are forming deeper connections with those around them. And what we find, particularly in Silicon Valley, is it's weird. Most of the companies that are started and most of the teams that are the most creative come about through teams. And these are often teams that have a great deal of trust with one another and a great deal of support and friendship. So actually helping people develop real-life friends in their world is not only just good for them as a person, but it's also good for whatever businesses they want to come up with in the future, because that forms a strong base from which that team can move forward. And what they find, what I often see is it's actually not the people with the best ideas that rise to the front. It's the teams who can handle adversity that actually last. Right? So one team might be a bunch of really, really smart people, but they don't know how to listen to one another. They have all these conflicts. The egos are battling. That team isn't going to do well in the long run. And that the team that maybe they're not so smart, they're okay, they don't have the greatest idea, they have an okay idea, but they actually know how to get along and they know how to communicate and they know how to kind of endure the hardships. Those are the teams that make it. And so I'd argue that the more people can develop colleagues and friends as students, that's helping them not only in their personal life, but it's also helping in whatever work world they move in. So I have one final announcement. Thank you, first of all, thank you so much for your attention. I feel like...
Soren, real quick, we do have a gentleman at the back microphone. You probably can't see him through the lights, but he had a question. He was up there for the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Oh, there you are, back.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think this is a great way to maximize learning in the classroom by connecting with your mind. As a faculty member, where can we go to find a repository of, let's say, online resources to implement this in the classroom? Because I really have no idea where to go.
That is a great idea. There's a woman named Suzer Kaiser Greenland, and she wrote a book called The Mindful Child. And she's done a whole lot of work about bringing it in more like K through 12 classrooms. So if you do a search for her, she's definitely a resource. There's also a mindfulness and education symposia that happens every year at the Garrison Institute. So if you do a search for Garrison Institute, they have information as well. So those are two potential resources. And I don't know about college, actually. There might be some, but I don't have any awareness of any associations or any books that are directed to that. I think in some ways it's such a growing field and new field that those of you here, like yourself, who are interested may soon become the resource. Because it's something that we've always known, but because of the way that which technology is now impacting so many parts of our lives, I feel like we're needing it more than ever. And so the desire and the interest is there more than ever. So I would check out those two, and I'd also take a lot of use of, see it as a bit of like a startup that we don't know the answer, and to try different things, and to see if we can create some learning environment around that. So I hope that's helpful, and I also feel like you and others will probably be able to answer that better in the years to come as you explore the question. Now there's also a little surprise. Underneath your chair, or some chairs, there's a star. And so if you have a star underneath your chair, you can take it to registration and you can get a free copy of my book. And I didn't come up with this idea, the team did here. And if there's an empty chair around you, feel free to look at those too. So if you find a star, that means you get a free copy of the book. If you find a circle, that means you owe us money. Now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Soren.